Cops slapped a Muslim man in court. Seconds later, he took the judge's seat. We have a dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers by the end of this month. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and become part of our dream too. The courtroom looked more like a theater than a place where people's lives were decided. High ceilings, polished wood, flags hanging neatly on either side of the judge's bench. The air buzzed with low whispers and shuffling papers. At the very back, on the last wooden bench, sat a man in a simple dark suit and a neatly wrapped navy blue kufi. His name was Yusuf Rahman, and to anyone watching casually, he was just another observer, someone's relative, maybe, or a curious passerby who'd wandered in to watch the spectacle. He kept his hands folded, back straight, gaze calm. No lawyer beside him. No briefcase. No air of importance. Yet there was a weight in the way he sat, a stillness that didn't quite match the nervous energy of the room. He watched everything, every sigh, every smirk, every careless word, with eyes that missed nothing. But nobody watched him. To them, he was just the Muslim man on the back bench. At the front of the room, two uniformed officers leaned against the side wall, whispering to each other and occasionally glancing at Yusuf with barely concealed disdain. One of them, Officer Blake, had a jaw clenched so tight it made a vein stand out in his neck. He'd had a bad morning, an angry sergeant, a stack of unfinished reports, and now he was stuck on courtroom duty instead of being out on the street. The other officer, Daniels, nudged him and tilted his head toward Yusuf. "You see that guy? Sat there through the last 3 hearings," he muttered, lips curling. "Probably here to complain about discrimination or some nonsense." Blake snorted softly. "Another one who thinks the system's against him. They all do." His gaze hardened as he watched Yusuf bow his head to check a folded sheet of paper in his hands. "Look at him. Doesn't even belong here." At the clerk's desk, Maya Collins, the court clerk, busied herself with files, trying to block out the low, mocking tones behind her. She'd grown used to the officers' offhand comments, the sideways jokes about defendants, the casual way they labeled people. But something about their focus on the quiet man at the back made her stomach knot. She had noticed Yusuf each day too, always early, always on that same bench, always respectful. No phone out, no muttering, no interruptions. Just patience. Sometimes, when the courtroom emptied during recess, she had seen him pause by the window, close his eyes for a moment, lips moving in silent prayer. There was a dignity about him that made the officer's jokes feel even uglier. Maya looked up now and caught a glimpse of him pressing that folded paper between his fingers, as if steadying himself for something only he knew was coming. The door behind the bench opened with a soft click. "All rise," Maya called, voice clear. Everyone stood as Judge Harold McIntyre entered, robe flowing, expression somewhere between bored and annoyed. He nodded perfunctorily, settled into his chair, and signaled for everyone to sit. As the first case of the afternoon was called, Blake and Daniels shifted position, staying near the aisle. The day moved in a slow grind of hearings, probation violations, minor disputes, plea deals that ended as quickly as they began. Yet through it all, Yusuf stayed seated, calm, almost patient. When there was a pause between cases, Maya noticed Judge McIntyre glance toward the back, eyes narrowing slightly at the sight of the still, watchful man. The judge leaned down toward the clerk's bench. "Who is he?" he murmured. Maya hesitated. "I don't know, Your Honor. He's been here all week." The judge's brow furrowed, a flash of irritation crossing his face. "Have security check him," he muttered under his breath. "We don't need trouble today." Blake heard those words, and his lips curled into a thin smile. For Yusuf Rahman, the day had just shifted. And no one in that courtroom had any idea how far it was about to go. Officer Blake didn't wait for further instruction. Judge McIntyre's quiet irritation was enough for him to act boldly, too boldly. He straightened his shoulders, exchanged a smirk with Daniels, and began walking down the aisle toward the last bench. Yusuf noticed the movement immediately, but he didn't shift or flinch. He simply folded the paper in his hands and placed it gently in his coat pocket. His expression remained calm, almost serene, even as Blake stopped directly in front of him. "You," Blake said, voice loud enough for half the courtroom to hear. "Stand up." The murmurs faded. A few heads turned. Yusuf looked up with steady, unthreatening eyes. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked quietly. Blake bristled at the calmness. "You've been hanging around all week," he snapped. "Sitting there like you're waiting for something." "I am," Yusuf replied. "For what?" Blake demanded. Yusuf held his gaze. "My hearing." Blake barked a laugh. "Your hearing? You're not on the docket." "I am," Yusuf repeated. His voice held no challenge, just fact. Daniels took a step closer. "Let's see some ID." Yusuf reached slowly for his wallet, controlled, visible, trained movements. He wasn't a man unfamiliar with officers or their suspicion. But as he opened the wallet, Blake's irritation flared into something harsher, uglier. "Cut the act," Blake snapped. "You think you can sit in the back like you're, what, important?" And then it happened, fast, reckless, shocking. Blake slapped the wallet out of Yusuf's hand. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Smack. The wallet hit the floor, papers scattering. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even Judge McIntyre looked up sharply. Blake took a threatening step forward. "I said stand up." And without waiting, without reason, without restraint, he slapped Yusuf across the face. Hard. The kind of slap meant to humiliate. The kind meant to remind someone of their place. The kind delivered by a man who believed the courtroom belonged to him. Maya gasped, hand flying to her mouth. Daniel stiffened, eyes widening. This wasn't procedure. This wasn't protocol. This was a line crossed so boldly that the room itself seemed to recoil. Yusuf's head turned slightly from the force, but he didn't rise. He didn't shout. He didn't even lift a hand to his cheek. He simply closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if absorbing not the pain, but the intent. Then he inhaled. Deep. Steady. Controlled. Almost sorrowful. When he opened his eyes again, there was something different in them. Not anger. Not fear. Authority. Real authority. Blake leaned in, lips curling. "You people think you can come in here and..." He didn't finish the sentence. Because at that moment, Maya Collins, the clerk, rushed forward. "Stop," she cried. "You can't do that, he hasn't done anything." Judge McIntyre slammed his gavel. "Officer Blake, return to your post." But Blake ignored him. His pride had taken over. He reached again for Yusuf's collar. When a voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. "That's enough." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't loud. But it carried a weight that made the entire room freeze. Yusuf slowly rose to his feet. But he didn't rise like a frightened man or a guilty man. He rose like someone accustomed to commanding rooms, not sitting quietly in the back of them. Judge McIntyre stiffened, his eyes widening slightly. Because for the first time, he saw something he should have noticed the moment Yusuf walked in. Something small. Something subtle. Something unmistakable. Pinned inside Yusuf's coat, barely visible until he stood, was a judicial identification badge. Not for an attorney. Not for a clerk. Not for a visitor. For a judge. Judge Harold McIntyre's face blanched. And above the stunned silence, Yusuf Rahman spoke again, calm, controlled, devastating. "I believe you've taken my seat." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Blake stumbled backward, color draining from his face. Maya stared at Yusuf like she was seeing him for the first time. And Judge McIntyre? His hands shook on the bench. Because he now understood exactly who the quiet man in the last row really was. And the consequences of that slap had only just begun. A tremor of disbelief rippled through the courtroom as Yusuf Rahman stood fully upright, his quiet dignity suddenly reframed by the glint of the judicial badge inside his coat. Officer Blake. Officer Blake stumbled back as if struck by a force far stronger than the slap he had delivered moments earlier. His confidence evaporated. His mouth opened and closed like he was searching for a script he no longer remembered. Daniel shifted nervously, eyes darting between Yusuf and the judge as though the floor itself had turned dangerous. Meanwhile, Maya Collins stood frozen at the clerk's desk, papers trembling faintly in her hands. She had suspected something about Yusuf before, sensed an assurance that didn't match the anonymity others forced on him, but this? A judge? One who had been sitting silently under their noses for days. Judge Harold McIntyre. Judge Harold McIntyre leaned forward, his face draining of color as he finally recognized the badge's insignia. "This must be a misunderstanding," he stammered. I wasn't informed of any visiting judge assigned to my docket." His hands fumbled across the papers on his bench, suddenly disorganized, suddenly unsteady. Yusuf stepped down the aisle with the calm authority of someone who had walked this path countless times, not as an observer, but as the one people stood for when he entered a room. His voice remained controlled. "I did not come as a visitor, Judge McIntyre." He paused. "I came because this court was under review." Gasps erupted. Blake's knees wobbled. Maya's hand flew to her mouth. McIntyre blinked rapidly. "Our review," he whispered. "Of me?" Yusuf stopped only a few feet from the bench. "Judicial Conduct Oversight assigned me," he said, pulling the folded paper from his pocket. He opened it, slowly, deliberately, revealing an official sealed order. The sight of it made McIntyre visibly recoil. Yusuf's voice softened, but the softness cut deeper than anger ever could. "For a week, I observed this courtroom. I watched how defendants were treated, how officers behaved, how discretion was used and misused." His eyes moved to Maya, and for a moment, she felt seen in a way she hadn't experienced in months. Then Yusuf looked back at Blake. "And today," he continued, "that observation became evidence." Blake's mouth twitched as if he wanted to defend himself, but the words refused to come. He stared at the floor as though hoping it would swallow him whole. McIntyre rose halfway from his chair. "Judge Rahman," he said, attempting a brittle smile, "had I known you were here in an official capacity." Yusuf raised a hand. McIntyre fell silent immediately. "You were not meant to know," Yusuf replied. "Oversight reviews are not effective when the subjects change their behavior to appear compliant." Every word was gentle, but the gentleness was devastating. "Your docket has shown patterns of bias. Excessive force tolerated in the courtroom. Improper conduct by officers under your supervision." Blake flinched. Daniel swallowed hard. McIntyre's chest tightened visibly. "But today," Yusuf added, lowering his gaze. "Today was more than misconduct. It was an assault." The room fell into a silence so heavy it pressed against the walls. Blake's voice cracked first. He didn't identify himself." Yusuf turned his eyes toward him. Calm. Unimpressed. "I identified myself as a human being deserving of dignity," he said softly. "That should have been enough." No one breathed. No one spoke. Even the air seemed to wait. Then Yusuf looked directly at the bench. "At this time," he said, straightening his shoulders, "Judge McIntyre, please step down." The courtroom erupted, shouts, gasps, whispers, but Yusuf's voice cut through them all without needing to rise. "For the remainder of these proceedings, I will be presiding." And in that moment, seconds after being slapped like he was nothing, Yusuf Rahman walked past the trembling officers, ascended the steps, and took the judge's seat. When Yusuf Rahman lowered himself into the judge's seat, the very seat he had once been denied even the dignity of approaching, the entire courtroom seemed to forget how to breathe. Officer Blake stood frozen, jaw trembling, the red imprint of his own slap still visible on Yusuf's cheek like a signature of his downfall. Daniel shifted backward until his shoulders pressed against the wall, as if distance could erase what had just happened. Maya Collins clutched the edge of her desk, eyes wide, witnessing a moment she knew would echo far beyond this room. Even the spectators, people who moments earlier were scrolling their phones, whispering, waiting impatiently, now stared in stunned silence. And Judge McIntyre? He stood beside the bench like a man whose world had cracked. His authority, once unquestioned, hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Yusuf rested his hands gently on the polished wood, inhaled slowly, and spoke with a quiet power that made every head turn toward him. "This courtroom," he began, "belongs to justice. Not intimidation. Not ego. Not prejudice." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Authority did not shout. It resonated. McIntyre swallowed hard. With respect, Judge Rahman, this is highly irregular. Yusuf lifted a single hand. McIntyre fell completely silent. For days, Yusuf continued, I observed individuals being treated as burdens rather than human beings. I watched defensiveness where there should have been compassion. Impatience where there should have been diligence. And disdain where there should have been impartiality. Maya's eyes softened. She had felt all those things. She had endured them quietly. Then Yusuf turned his gaze toward the officers. Not with anger. With truth. Officer Blake, he said, voice like unfolding steel, step forward. Blake's legs barely carried him. He walked with the stiffness of a man approaching his own sentence. Judge Rahman, I want to apologize, I didn't know. Yusuf didn't let him finish. You slapped a man who complied. You slapped a man who posed no threat. You escalated without cause. And you struck someone whose only offense was your assumption of inferiority. Blake's face turned ashen. Sir, Again, Yusuf raised a hand. Again, silence. You believed I was beneath you, he said quietly. And so you struck before you thought. He leaned forward just slightly, his calm expression slicing deeper than any shout could. Tell me, Officer Blake, how many others have you struck when no one was watching? The courtroom gasped. Maya's chest tightened. Daniels looked away. Even McIntyre winced. Blake opened his mouth but no words came. His throat bobbed. His palms shook. Guilt poured through the cracks in his bravado. Yusuf turned now to Maya. Miss Collins, he said gently, you witnessed the incident? She nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I did. Would you please go on record? Her voice shook, but not from fear. From release. Officer Blake slapped him without provocation. Twice. There was no justification. None. Yusuf nodded. Thank you, Miss Collins. Your courage is noted. Maya blinked. No one had called her courageous before. Not once. Then Yusuf looked back at McIntyre. In accordance with oversight protocol, he said, your courtroom is now under temporary transfer of authority pending review. McIntyre's lips parted in protest. But he did not dare speak. Yusuf lifted the gavel. A quiet stillness washed over the room. As acting presiding judge, he declared, I will now address the first matter before this court. He looked directly at Blake. Your conduct. Blake's knees buckled. And in that instant, the man they had mocked, slapped, dismissed, became the man who would decide their fate. Silence so absolute fell over the courtroom that even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum more quietly, as if the entire building were holding its breath. Yusuf Rahman set the gavel down gently, not as a threat, but as a promise that what happened next would be deliberate, fair, and irreversible. Officer Blake stood rigid, sweat beading at his temples, while Daniels hovered behind him, looking younger and more frightened than he had moments earlier. Maya watched them with a mix of relief and dread. She had seen misconduct before, but never had she seen it confronted with such composure, such precision. Yusuf's calm wasn't passivity, it was control. Officer, Yusuf said, folding his hands before him, you understand that striking an unarmed civilian without cause is not only misconduct, it is a criminal offense. Blake's voice cracked. Judge Rahman, I lost my temper. I'm sorry. I panicked. I thought. No, Yusuf interrupted softly. You did not panic. You acted from entitlement, not fear. Whispers rippled through the room. Even McIntyre's head dipped in shame as Yusuf continued. You believed the courtroom belonged more to you than to the people it serves. But that is not how justice works. Yusuf turned to Daniels. Officer, did you condone or attempt to stop your partner? Daniels swallowed. And no, sir. I didn't stop him. Why not? Daniels's voice shrank. He outranks me. Yusuf's gaze sharpened. Rank does not excuse silence. Daniels nodded slowly, realizing the weight of what those words meant, not just for this moment, but for every moment he'd chosen not to speak before. Then Yusuf reached for the sealed document he had placed on the bench. He unfolded it with deliberate grace, showing the embossed insignia of judicial oversight. This is not a mere observation, he said. This is the initiation of a formal misconduct inquiry. I was assigned under a special mandate. The authority granted to me is temporary, but complete. He looked directly at McIntyre. All proceedings in this courtroom fall under my discretion until this review is concluded. McIntyre sank back into his chair beside the bench, palms sweating. For years he had operated with unquestioned authority. For years he had allowed officers like Blake far more room than the law permitted. And for years, no one had held him accountable. That era ended today. Therefore, Yusuf continued, Officer Blake, you are immediately suspended from duty pending criminal review for assault, abuse of authority, and obstruction of judicial function. Blake's face drained. You can't suspend me. I serve under precinct command. Incorrect, Yusuf replied, voice steady as stone. In this courtroom, you serve under the law. He turned to Daniels. You are placed under administrative review for failure to intervene, as required by statute. Daniels's shoulders sagged. I understand, sir. Maya felt a tremor of emotion, relief mixed with vindication. Years of watching misconduct dismissed, ignored, buried, and finally, someone with the authority and courage to confront it was here, sitting on the bench they had assumed belonged only to men who looked and acted like McIntyre. But Yusuf wasn't finished. He rose from the bench. His presence filled the room, not with intimidation, but with unwavering principle. This courtroom has forgotten its purpose, he said. Justice has been replaced by routine. Compassion replaced by impatience. Authority replaced by ego. He looked out at the crowd, defendants, families, lawyers, onlookers, people who had walked into this room expecting another day of fear or humiliation. Today, Yusuf declared, that ends. A quiet ripple of awe moved through the gallery. This will become a place where defendants are treated with dignity. Where officers act with restraint. Where every human being, regardless of faith or appearance, is shown respect. Blake stared at the floor in shame. Daniels breathed shakily. McIntyre closed his eyes, the weight of years of negligence crashing down. And Maya felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Yusuf lowered himself back into the judge's seat, letting the silence settle like a new foundation. For the first time in a very long time, he said softly, let us proceed with true justice. And from the back of the room, people sat straighter. Listened closer. Believed, maybe for the first time, that this courtroom might finally serve them too. For several long seconds, no one moved. It was as if the entire courtroom needed time to adjust, to the shift in power, to the return of dignity, to the presence of a judge who carried authority not like a weapon, but like a responsibility. Yusuf Rahman scanned the room quietly, letting the tension dissolve into something steadier, something cleaner. His calm expression didn't hide the firmness beneath it. This was no performance. This was a man reclaiming the integrity of a space that had forgotten its purpose. Then, unexpectedly, a soft voice rose from the gallery. A woman in a faded gray sweater stood up. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "Your Honor, may I say something?" The entire courtroom turned toward her. Even Maya blinked in surprise. No one ever addressed the bench voluntarily in this room. Not with McIntyre presiding. Not with Blake watching from the side. Yusuf nodded. "You may." The woman swallowed, gathering courage. "I came here today for my son's hearing," she said. "And I was afraid. I thought nobody would listen to him. To us." Daniels looked down, shame twisting his features. Officer Blake clenched his jaw. McIntyre wiped his forehead. "But when you stood up," the woman continued, her voice steadying, "for a moment, I felt safe. Like this room finally belonged to all of us, not just some of us." A murmur of agreement spread through the benches, quiet, respectful, but unmistakable. Mothers. Fathers. Young men waiting for their names to be called. Older women clutching folders of paperwork. People who had walked into this courtroom expecting judgment before they ever spoke. Yusuf inclined his head. "Thank you for saying that." His voice was gentle, but the gravity behind it made her sit down with visible relief. Maya felt emotion rising in her throat. She had worked in this courtroom for years, long enough to feel the subtle humiliation that pooled in the corners, unspoken but ever-present. She had stayed because she needed the job, because she believed systems could change from within, because she hoped someone would one day walk through the doors who believed the same. And now he sat on the bench. Yusuf turned his attention forward. "Miss Collins," he said. Maya snapped upright. "Yes, Your Honor. Please bring me the docket for the remainder of the afternoon." She nearly smiled. His tone was respectful. Equal. Professional. Something she had never felt from McIntyre. "Right away, sir." As she approached the bench, she passed McIntyre standing awkwardly to the side. For the first time in her career, she saw a judge look small. Not because Yusuf diminished him, but because the truth had finally been allowed to stand tall. Yusuf opened the docket carefully. "Our next case is a juvenile matter." A teenage boy stood shakily, his mother gripping his arm. Blake shifted uncomfortably. He had handled the arrest. Daniels closed his eyes. Yusuf lifted the file. This young man was cited for disorderly conduct after officers responded to a noise complaint. He looked up. "Officer Daniels," he said calmly, "were you present?" Daniels nodded. "Yes, sir." "Did the young man resist?" "No, sir." "Was he cooperative?" "Yes, sir." "Was he violent?" "No, sir." "Then why," Yusuf asked evenly, "was force listed in the arrest notes?" Blake stiffened. Daniels swallowed. The gallery waited. Daniels spoke first. It shouldn't have been." Blake shot him a furious look, but the younger officer continued. "He didn't fight." Blake added that part because he thought it would stick. Gasps echoed. The boy's mother sobbed softly in relief. Yusuf nodded slowly, eyes softening. "Thank you for your honesty, Officer Daniels. It may save more than your career." Daniels bowed his head, shame and gratitude mixing across his face. Then Yusuf looked at the frightened teen. "Young man," he said gently, "you are free to go. Case dismissed." The courtroom erupted, quietly, respectfully, but with joy. For the first time in years, Maya thought, this courtroom is breathing. She watched Yusuf lift the next file, steady, thoughtful, unshakable. This wasn't just oversight. This wasn't just correction. This was transformation. And beneath the awe and justice and returned dignity, something deeper was happening. The people in the room, every last one, were starting to believe again. The courtroom had shifted so completely that even the walls felt different, lighter, almost relieved. People who had entered with slumped shoulders now sat straighter. Mothers held their sons' hands with renewed hope. Defendants who once expected humiliation now leaned forward, actually listening. Maya felt it too. The oxygen in the room had changed. It didn't sting anymore. It didn't weigh heavy. It didn't taste like fear. It tasted like justice. But not everyone welcomed the change. At the far side of the room, Judge McIntyre stood stiffly, his hands clasped too tightly behind his back. His face held the fragile calm of a man trying to pretend he still mattered. And Officer Blake, whose arrogance had collapsed like glass, hovered with a twitching jaw, eyes burning with humiliation. Suspended. Exposed. Stripped of the authority he had abused for years. The consequences had only begun, and he knew it. Yusuf Rahman continued scanning the docket, but he could feel their eyes on him, two men who had lived unchecked for too long. He had seen their type in other courtrooms, other cities, other broken systems. Men who confused power with worth. Men who thought fear created order. Men who had forgotten that justice worked only when humility led the way. Maya stepped forward with the next file, her voice steady. Your Honor, this is a motion for review of a bond hearing ruled earlier this week. Thank you, Ms. Collins, Yusuf said, giving her a nod that made warmth bloom unexpectedly in her chest. Before he could continue, the courtroom doors burst open with a loud bang. A man in a suit entered, sweating, breathing hard. Deputy Chief Warren, head of courthouse security, strode down the aisle with urgency carved into every step. He glanced at Blake, then at McIntyre, then finally at Yusuf. And he froze. You're... Yes, Yusuf said calmly, not making him finish. Please step forward, Deputy Chief. Warren approached like a man unsure which direction gravity was pulling. Your Honor, I received a call from the circuit office. They said Judge Rahman was assigned here under sealed mandate, but I had no. I understand, Yusuf replied. Your presence is appreciated. Warren nodded quickly, flustered. Then his eyes landed on Blake, who tried to stand straighter, as if posture alone might restore his authority. Officer Blake, Warren said, voice stone cold, I've just been informed of your suspension. You are to surrender your badge and weapon immediately. Blake froze. Here? Now? Yes, Warren barked. Now. The courtroom went silent as Blake slowly unhooked his badge, hands shaking, and placed it in Warren's outstretched palm. Then came the firearm, the last piece of power he still held. When it left his holster, something in the room shifted again. People saw it. Felt it. A symbol of fear removed from the hands of a man who never deserved it. Warren nodded toward Yusuf with genuine respect. Your Honor, the precinct commander has been notified. Internal Affairs has been dispatched. Thank you, Yusuf said. Please remain for the rest of the proceedings. Yes, sir. Blake sank into a chair, face pale. Daniel swallowed hard, looking at his partner with a mixture of pity and bitter truth. Yusuf returned his focus to the docket. We will continue, he announced. But before he could turn the page, McIntyre moved. He stepped forward, not boldly, not confidently, but like a man clinging to the last thread of relevance. Judge Rahman, McIntyre said, voice trembling, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. If I may, speak privately? Off the record. Yusuf looked up slowly. The room held its breath. No, Yusuf said gently. You may speak here. Where accountability belongs. McIntyre's face broke. His lips trembled. And in that moment, the entire courtroom saw him clearly, not as the towering figure he pretended to be, but as a man who had let ego guide him so far off course that he no longer recognized the path back. Please, McIntyre whispered. I didn't know. I never meant. Yusuf stood. The room felt it, justice rising. Judge McIntyre, he said softly, this moment is not about what you meant. It is about what you allowed. What you ignored. What you failed to protect. McIntyre's shoulders crumpled. And today, Yusuf continued, your silence ends. Your accountability begins. A ripple spread through the room, fear from the guilty, relief from the innocent. Yusuf sat back down. Bring me the next case. And for the first time in the history of that courtroom, people believed they were about to receive something they had never truly been given. Real justice. The courtroom had transformed into something it had never been. A place where silence meant respect, not fear. Where stillness meant attention, not intimidation. As Yusuf Rahman reviewed the final cases, the gallery remained utterly focused. For once, justice felt tangible, like a presence standing beside him, echoing through every word he spoke. People felt protected. They felt seen. They felt equal. And yet, the shift in the room wasn't truly complete, not until the last matter was addressed. Judge McIntyre still stood beside the wall, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Sweat gathered at his hairline. His pride, his posture, his authority, all had dissolved into fragile pieces. But there was one more truth to confront. Yusuf closed the final file. This concludes the active docket, he said. Now, we address the matter of judicial conduct. A collective gasp fluttered across the room. McIntyre took a shaky breath. Judge Rahman, I beg you. I made mistakes. But I devoted years to this bench. Surely that counts for something. Yusuf studied him, not with cruelty, not with anger, but with the quiet weight of someone who understood what leadership demanded. Years do not absolve harm, Yusuf said softly. They only deepen it when uncorrected. McIntyre's face twitched. Please. I never wanted it to be like this. No, Yusuf replied. You simply let it happen. There was no venom in the words, only truth. Yusuf turned to Maya. Miss Collins, please read the formal oversight recommendation. Hands trembling, Maya lifted the sealed document Yusuf had handed her earlier. Her voice steadied as she read. Effective immediately, Judge Harold McIntyre is relieved of courtroom authority pending full review by the Judicial Conduct Board. A stunned silence followed. McIntyre's eyes glistened, not with anger, but with the sharp sting of awakening too late. And as of this moment, Yusuf continued, rising from the bench. I am placing this courtroom, and every individual within it, under temporary protective oversight. He stepped down from the bench. His every movement was calm, grounded, and resonant with purpose. He faced the officers, the families, the defendants, and finally, McIntyre. This room is not a kingdom, Yusuf said. It is not a stage for ego. It is not a weapon to be used against the vulnerable. His voice grew steady, powerful. A courtroom is a sanctuary of truth. And every person who enters deserves dignity, fairness, and humanity. A few people wiped tears. Some nodded. Others placed hands over their hearts. Yusuf approached Blake, now seated, pale, stripped of the badge he misused. You will answer for what you did, Yusuf said quietly. Not because I wore a badge, but because no one deserves to be treated the way you treated me, or anyone else. Blake lowered his head, for the first time understanding the weight of his choices. Yusuf walked toward the gallery, scanning the faces of people who had endured years of mistreatment in this very room. Justice, he said, has never belonged to those in power. He paused. It belongs to all of you. The courtroom erupted, not in chaos, not in shouting, but in something powerful and humbling. Applause. Soft at first, then louder, filling the room like a rising tide. Maya pressed a hand to her chest, eyes shining. Yusuf didn't smile, but his expression softened into something peaceful, something fulfilled. He nodded once, then turned to leave. Before he reached the doors, a voice called out. Your Honor, will you come back? Yusuf paused. Turned. And with a quiet sincerity that silenced the room once more, he answered. If this community needs me, I will always return. He stepped through the doors. And the building itself seemed to stand taller. Because a man they slapped, mocked, dismissed, had walked in with humility, risen with truth, and walked out as the judge they never knew they desperately needed. If you made it this far, subscribe, leave your like, and tell us where you're watching from. Thank you, and see you next time.